As I entered the capital, I passed by familiar deserted, battered roads. I walked past through an empty road until I got to the edge of the capital. I looked up at the high-rise buildings there that I must have seen a million times, but never like this. Never like this. The front of the buildings were missing. They had been torn apart. Bricks and rubble lined the paths towards them. Inside you could see the steel structures that held the buildings up. It reminded me of an Egyptian temple in the hot sun, a reminder that man had once lived there. A very large tombstone, a very large grave, 6 feet above the ground. I looked to the ground floor, and there were bodies that had fallen with the floor and ceiling and been piled up upon one another. The stench in the capital was extreme. Next to the bodies were the outage that leaves the body when the life's muscles relax and you are no more. How many people died in this densely populated capital? I had no idea. I felt like just walking back and not going on, afraid to see the rest. I wanted to just go back and sleep as if this was some kind of nasty dream that could go away. But this was no dream. This time my eyes were fully awake. I carried on, walking up to another building. I walked inside, over the dead bodies, up a steel staircase till I got to the upper floor of what seemed was once a house for a family, their pictures still remaining on the walls, whilst their lifeless bodies rotted on the floor. I stood by the edge where the front wall of this upper room once must have been, and looked out at the rest of the city beyond. I saw pockets of people in the distance, looting goods and shops. I saw people carrying out a TV, a couple holding each end of a 3-piece sofa, 4 men carrying out an American-styled fridge. 1 man carried a big handful of notes. I wondered to myself what was the point of these goods that had no purpose any more. When bread and water were a more sought-after commodity, what was the point of a TV without a signal, money with no items to buy? What was the point? I left the building and carried on walking through the streets. As I did so, it was as if I had travelled through time, as the sides of the streets seemed transformed to some Dickensian time. People sat in hovels in the road next to their derelict houses, their clothes dirty and sticking to them with sweat, their faces unwashed and lined with the worries of the world. 1 woman sat by a hole as her child poured water in as she rinsed her clothes in the dirty dishwater. These people did not say a word, did not even look at me. It was as if I were not there. Maybe their squalor shamed them to even raise their heads up to my eyes looking down upon them. I passed this area after trying to talk to these people, but no words were uttered, not one at all. Next I came across a row of people, hundreds, all in torn clothing, bathed in the sun as it set. They wandered aimlessly about, often bumping into one another. They were like unprogrammed droids. I pulled at them to grab their attention, but they did not speak. As I watched their faces their way, I knew what it was that I was seeing. This was the face of defeat, the defeat of mankind. I was no doctor, but these were disenfranchised people. They had lost all hope. As they walked in circles, I managed to rift through their pockets, finding wallets, photos, and other such trinkets. I showed them to their owners, but there was no recognition. I could well imagine that wives, children, husbands could be walking right next to each other, bumping into one another, only to move on again. I felt a wave of depression crushing onto me. I felt as if I had seen everything possible, but this sad painting that animated itself in front of me was far the saddest thing I had ever seen. Mankind had lost his reason to go on, his hope. I felt these strangers alone, and carried on till I found myself in front of a building where the Premier lived. The building stood in its full glory. The bright red painted door was as new as it was when it was first painted. The door was ajar, so I let myself in. It was dark inside, as was most of the capital. I stepped inside, and as I did so, I heard a wheezing kind of noise. As I got closer, I saw a big metal device in the middle of the room. It was an iron lung. Sticking out of the end was a head. I walked closer to the head to see who it was. I shouldn't have been surprised, as it was the head of the Premier. He seemed in some kind of great pain. I had no time to ask him what was the matter, as out of the shadows jumped 4 men, who pulled me to my knees. Came to pay your respects, man. Sorry, I muttered. No matter. What? Then ensued a silence as one of the men hit the face of the Premier and he screamed out in pain. What are you doing to him? What's it got to do with you, matey? What we do to him is as much our leader as he yours, and we are reconciling him with the full force of the people's democracy, you see, as we see it. It's his fault we're in this shit situation, this lack of willingness to look after us. Every man must face his deeds. Here cometh his retribution. And what makes you judge and jury? The man turned around and slapped me across the face, causing my lip to bleed. Did I make you bleed? Did you like that? I can inflict more pain if you should choose. Why, he's in an iron lung. Good question, mate. We found him in an exposed bunker 2 miles from here. He must have got to the shelter when he heard the reports of the fog. Maybe he didn't even get there in time and his lungs failed. We're not sure. His doctor put him in it. We found him like this and dragged him all the way back to his home with his people to face this situation like a man with us rather than hiding away underground. What are you going to do with me? Oh, I won't worry about yourself. You're like us. I doubt it, I muttered. It's him who has to worry. We thought we'd make him suffer like all those of his people he let down. Why do we need nuclear stations anyhow? We never use them, and I suspect he never paid for enough to keep them safe, and anyway, he knew about this fog, you see, long before us. He was well away before it came, but kept it to himself and his rich buddies. See, they all found themselves a nice underground grave to wallow in, whilst we, already mortals up here, died in our own filth. Not all of us, mind you. I suspect his generals didn't factor that equation in, and now we'll factor him in. Boys, open it up. The other 3 moved onto the iron lung and started to undo the buckles on the side and expose the limp and yellow-stained body of the Premier. What a stench, said one of the men nearest to the Premier. Looks as if his own body had decayed in there, rather metaphoric, don't you think? I watched out in horror as they lifted the body of the Premier and slumped him on the floor. The way his body moved reminded me of a worm out on the soil as the sun began to shine, and soon a bird would come and bite off his head. The men started laying into him, punching his stomach, twisting his limbs, cutting veins on his legs. He yelled in pain in between taking long stretches of breaths. I did not know whether he felt the pain inflicted on his body, as it seemed so thin and lifeless already. And maybe that pain was not felt by him. The thugs did not realize this, but their joy was just the same. The pain he was feeling was being exposed from the iron lung, unable to breathe, as he couldn't force his stomach muscles and lung to pull in and out the air that is so essential for a man to live. Soon his face went blue, his cheeks descended deep within his face, as did his eyes, as he took the last few breaths of his agonizing life. That's it, boys, he's gone. Never vote for him anyway. And with that they swaggered off, as I imagine they must have come, and left me close to the reeking body of the man that had once led this country. I wondered as I looked at his dead eyes whether he really deserved the death he was handed out, whether cowardice should be a crime, and yet it was not his cowardice. His retribution was in payback before, as the thugs had said. It was the fact that he withheld the situation to all the people that he left to suffer worse deaths 1,000,000 times other than him. I left the Premier's office and walked towards the other side of the city. I did not see another soul. I decided after all the day's happenings that I would continue northwards to my parents' house, the house in which I had been born. In the back of my mind I'd hoped maybe the fog had not reached that far, that possibly there could be people completely unaware of what had befallen us all. Down another street through a passway I saw a truck pull up and empty its load onto a big fire. I walked nearer, but the smell answered my question long before my eyes did. The load on the truck was dead bodies, and they were being slung into the self-made furnace on the ground. I watched the flames rise, the embers float, as if the dead flesh flew up its majesty like butterflies in the sky, the soul realized. But this sight only conjured up memories of how diseased cattle were indiscriminately bungled up and flew onto the fires all in a mess. It somehow didn't seem right not having the benefit of an honorary grave where people could come and pay their respects. I came across a broken-in government security building. I squeezed through the open door into the darkness, which was occasionally lit by flickering pictures. I walked towards the television set. It was playing back CCTV footage. It showed the Capitol as the fog floated in. Then I saw large amounts of people running, jumping into the river. Their skins were burnt dark grey in the black and white images. I saw the mass exodus of these people. After a while the river was quiet. The people died therein. There were other images of different locations playing. I'm not sure why. Maybe the operator left it on this loop, in case someone should wonder what had happened to this great city. But I was already too aware of this great calamity. I left the building and passed a big hotel, and I decided I would take a room for the night. I went to the reception area, pulled a few pairs of keys from the rack. I wished I had looked at the numbers, rather than just grabbing the first that had come to me. As I ended up right on the 63rd floor. Height was not one of my strong points, but I felt so tired I thought it wouldn't matter. I opened the first door, but quietly slammed it shut, as I saw the festering, worm-laden bodies of a couple. I dropped the keys outside the door and tried the next bunch. This time the room was empty. I looked around all the rooms before I took a long bath and found a new set of clothing in the wardrobe. I tried ringing the phone, but no one answered. No chance of room service then, I laughed. The bath had done me good. I felt clean and refreshed. But as I walked up to the window-framed wall, I looked out at the dark city that lay in front of my view. How different it must normally look. What a beautiful sight, and now it was as if I was looking down upon the destruction of mankind. As I carried on looking around, I heard a massive explosion, and then the room began to shake. I fell flat on the window, losing my feet. Only the window and me between the 1,000-mile drop. I thought at first it might be another earthquake, that the genetic radiation had continued to alter Mother Nature's atoms, but as I continued to look down, I saw yards before the front of the hotel a tank. As I did so, I saw another missile launched from it, and straight into the lower ground of the building. Again it shook. I felt as if the moment the building would collapse. As I looked down, I saw the familiar number of 4 men. It must have been those thugs that had killed the Premier. I shouted down from the very top of the hotel, but there was no way they could hear me. Another missile packed its way into the side of the building. This time I heard a noise like bending steel and felt the building visibly shift. It only took another missile and then the building was loose. I felt the earth come up around my feet and back down again. I looked in front of me as I could see the ground coming towards me. The building was bending over and I heard the steel snap. And the building began to plunge at a 45-degree angle towards the ground. As it did so, I felt the sensation of losing ground, much like in an aeroplane as one lands. I felt the pressure and the horrible sensation of falling. My stomach left me long before anything else. As I fell in what seemed an age, time seemed to slow down, as if that moment had been paused. My life flashed before my eyes, all the horrors I had seen, my wife lying on the floor, the day we met, the day we were married, my first day at school, college, university, my first real tears, laughter, all of it, Jenny, Valentine, Harkin, the Overgates, all of them. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Then I found myself calling out for God's help. Strange, I thought, why should he help me? For when my life had no problems, I never even uttered his name. And the minute I was in trouble, I sought his help. But even so, when my wife died, I only blamed him. I never sought his help, but still I called out again. I felt the early floors of the buildings crash down onto the floor. I knew it was only a matter of seconds till I would hit the ground as the other parts of the building crumbled into the floor. I was thrown by the force back from the window further in the building. Then I heard splinters at the window as the top of the hotel crashed to the ground. Black dust billeted through the air. Then I heard an untimely thud, and the last thing I saw was darkness.